For example, this article over here in The Atlantic, in the debate over freedom versus control of the global network, China was largely correct and the US is wrong, right? Or, the NYT has tons of pieces on this, like free speech is killing us, right? Literally an article that's titled that, right? Or another one like the problem of free speech in an age of disinformation, right? And all of this is basically because, just talk about this for a second, these are, Sulzberger employees, right? This guy, Arthur G. Sulzberger, sixth generation nepotist, inherited the New York Times from his father's 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 father. Nobody ever writes about him because they're scared. Everybody writes about Zuck, who, for all his faults, basically built Facebook himself and who I respect. I don't respect Sulzberger, who's just a nepotist and who inherited the paper and who's basically a born millionaire. And, by the way, on this topic, there's so many articles, just to talk for a second, there's so many articles in New York Times that talk about how non-diverse tech is or whatever. And do you know the actual succession contest at the New York Times company for who's going to be the top publisher? Or who's going to have the top job?
No.
Who do you think it was between? Yeah, how does it work? Is it something, the Rooney Rule? The Rooney Rule, you're supposed to go and interview people from diverse backgrounds for the top position, right?
Yeah. In the
the diverse backgrounds they interviewed was 3 white male cousins for the top job, the New York Times, right? Read this article, A.G. Sulzberger, 37, to take over as New York Times publisher, right? So it's actually like a caricature of, look, as I've said before, I'm not the kind of person who thinks white is an insult, but these guys are, okay? And they say it constantly, oh my God, it's so white, it's so male. And yet this article is written as a coronation of, a great leader taking over from dealer leader or whatever, right? So this meritless nepotist and his employees, these, Sulzberger's Inheritance, that's the New York Times company, and Sulzberger employees, will write these articles about how free speech is killing us and how actually you're not supposed to have free speech, only Sulzberger employees are. And how if you say it, it's misinformation. When a Sulzberger employee says it, you're supposed to, bow, right? And they run these billboards that actually literally proclaim themselves to be the truth. In 2017, Sulzberger ran this ad campaign, The Truth. Do you remember that in 2017? Like, the truth is hard to find, etc. Now, do you know what other newspaper called itself The Truth?
No.
Pravda.
Oh, God.
The Soviet newspaper is Truth.
Oh.
Right? So the thing is, Sulzberger's innovation on this is it's not even at least Pravda is like free. He charges you $50 for the truth, right? And this is actually the same, we described that information supply chain, it's academia, media, government, right? So this is the second leg, which is completely corrupt. These folks who will charge you $49 a year for access to the truth, where really what you're just doing is propping up this family office, right? One of the things, by the way, you can sort of turn one of these corporate journalists to stone, by the way, when they're pretending to be all speaking truth to power. You say, okay, when are you going to write the big investigative journalism report on your boss, right? For example, recently, just to digress on this topic for a second, there's this BuzzFeed journo went and doxed the Bored Ape Yacht Club founders, right? Are they going to do that to Jonah Peretti, who runs BuzzFeed? No. Are they going to do it to Arthur Sulzberger, who owns the New York Times? No. Are they going to do it to the Newhouses that own Condé Nast? Absolutely not. Are they going to even mention them? Do you even know these people's names? No, you do not, right? Why? You know the names of all the tech people because media corporations are at war with tech companies, and the owners of media corporations it's not that they get good coverage, they get no coverage. They're just like blotted out. All this rhetoric about, oh my God, we need to investigate the powerful people and what, like these journos, you can just think of them as dogs on a leash, right? They are hitmen for old money. And as I said, you can turn them to stone by just asking them who's their owner. And you know what happens? They stop engaging on Twitter. You literally just turn them to stone. Why? Because whether consciously or unconsciously, they were either pretending to be decentralized, and unaccountable or whatever, and their own person. But when you mention their owner, they're like, oh, I can't believe you bring my boss into it or whatever, right? And you're like, oh, you have a boss. How about that? Oh, it's so interesting. How courageous that you go and investigate your competitor, but not your boss. Oh, and it just, boom, the entire facade falls, right? You just hit it from the right angle, as we talked about. You rotate it from the Z-axis, and you're like, these are just corporate pawns, right? And actually, the only journalism is citizen journalism, because that's independent, right? That's Substack, that's newsletters. That's something where that person may be flawed, but they're writing in their own voice over their own time. They can't be canceled, right? And they actually have an incentive that's the opposite of the school of fish strategy. Remember our thing about how tribalism, if there's an economic incentive, all those folks have to build their own newsletter distributions. So if they say exactly the same thing as everybody else, then they're not unique. So they actually have an incentive to stand out versus to fit in, you know?
Do you think that pushes people to more extremes in an effort to stand out? Like, so, like, I'm going to just push the right and the left even further.
Yeah. So there is that aspect. However, I think it's complicated because in the absence of, the people who complain about filter bubbles are complaining that there's more than one.
They just want to be the filter bubble, right?
They just want to be the filter bubble. They want the I Love Lucy environment of 1950, where there's just one telephone company and two superpowers and three television stations, and everybody's brainwashed in the same thing. And by the way, that's a very atypical environment through history. That level of centralization of power was actually very atypical. If you go further back in time, it's highly decentralized in an obligate way because you didn't have the ability to broadcast to the entire country at the same time. Telegrams and other kinds of things. I mean, you could send a few bits of information. You go further back, it's letters. When it's letters, you just have to run a decentralized system because, this group over here in Montana might not even hear news that the war was over until, 20 days later, right? Go ahead.
So why would the political system get behind this? Because, like, if I'm in power, this is a threat to my power. Like, why would I get behind any of this?
Well, the good thing is the current political system doesn't select for competent people. So you're right that it's a threat to their power in the same way that, like, a new startup is a threat to a nepotist's inherited corporation. But because they're a nepotist and not a meritocrat, they're not going to be able to wield that power and money in an intelligent way. And I'll give some examples, right? Every single thing over the last 20-something years since certainly I've been an adult and probably, we're roughly contemporaries. No, 9/11 was a surprise. WMDs in Iraq, that was a surprise. The collapse of Bear Stearns and then Lehman Brothers, that was a surprise. The Snowden revelations were a surprise, at least to the public and probably much of the elite. Trump was a surprise. COVID was a surprise, and Jan 6 is a surprise, and Afghanistan's a surprise, and everything's a surprise, right? And also, of course, all the rise of technology, where the stuff was dismissed as a fad and a bubble, and it's never, even in 2013, they were writing articles like Facebook will never make a significant profit, right? And yeah, Facebook has had some recent troubles, but Facebook did make a significant profit. And in 2013, they were saying that this was not going to be the case, fad, bubble. Then just a couple of years later, they switched from fad and bubble to what? Threat to democracy, right? So the consistency is the negativity, where at first they're dismissing it because it's never going to work. And then they're dismissing it or attacking it because it's too powerful, right? But what is missing is essentially the world is going to change, and I'm going to get a share of that new world by taking some risk in it, okay? Because the moment you actually start, one of the things about the establishment is they can only perceive things that are around 50% popularity, at least double-digit popularity. Anything that is too unpopular, that's at 0.1% or even less than that, they don't have the right mindset that this could grow quickly. That's why even